Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this weekly message of the Revival Academy. Today's topic is suffering in Christian life. One of the important themes in the New Testament is suffering, but unfortunately, this is not much spoken in churches in the Western world. The early Christians understood that to follow Christ is to suffer for Christ, and this is very clear from the life of Paul. After being blind on the road to Damascus, Jesus said to Ananias concerning Paul like this: "This man is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings, and before the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." Indeed, he went through all kinds of sufferings for the sake of Christ and his church. And in his epistles to the churches, he emphasizes that suffering is an essential part of the Christian life, although it is not something that everyone likes. So here are some lessons that we can learn about suffering from Paul's epistles. The first one is suffering is necessary to build the godly character for believers. From his experience, Paul knew that suffering did not only affect believers, but also perfect them. Therefore, he urged the church in Rome to rejoice in their sufferings in Romans chapter 5, verses from 3 and 4. But we also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. The word character in Greek is dokime, derived from dokimos, which means proof of genuineness. It implies that suffering is an important method to be tested and approved that our faith is genuine. The second lesson is suffering is necessary to partake in Christ's blessings. Paul said in Romans chapter 8 verse 17 like this: "Now if we are children, then we are heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory." In human nature, we eagerly accept the blessing, but normally we reject the suffering. But according to Paul, they both go hand in hand. We must share in the suffering in order to partake of the blessing. The interesting point is that the suffering precedes the blessing, as the suffering on the cross preceded the glorious resurrection. The third lesson that we can learn is that suffering is an act of fellowship with Christ. Philippians chapter 3 verse 10 says, "I want to know Christ, the power of his resurrection, and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death." Nowadays, many believers believe that Christian faith provides freedom from hardship and suffering, but we know that it's a false teaching. Both Paul and the rest of the early church knew that living for Christ included sharing in both the joys and sufferings of Christ. As we know, the Greek word for fellowship is koinonia, which means participation or fellowship, but it has an important meaning, which is intimate communion. It means that through sharing suffering of Christ, we can have the intimate communion with Christ. We normally think that we can build intimate relationship and communion with Christ through worship, through prayer, through reading the scriptures, and through participating in the sacraments. Yes, of course, all those things are important, but sharing suffering of Christ in our lives and in our ministries is another important element to have intimate communion with Christ. We are facing challenges and difficulties caused by various reasons and factors this week and this month and this year. In that situation, let us regard all the difficulties and sufferings as pure joy because of what they can do for us. James says that, "Saints, when you face trials, all different kinds, regard them as pure joy, because they can function positively to build our character, to partake in God's blessings, and also to build intimate communion with Christ." Let's take our sufferings as opportunities to be closer to God, to be more like Jesus Christ. Finally, I want to read these verses from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses from 7 to 9. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. When we are suffering, we are like jars of clay, so vulnerable and fragile. But don't forget that we have got this wonderful treasure, Jesus Christ, in us, who supplies all surpassing power and understanding for perseverance in the suffering and resilience to overcome the sufferings eventually. Trust in Jesus Christ if you are going through any kind of suffering and trial this week, because He is faithful and He is sympathetic and He knows exactly what is happening in our lives. Come to Him, kneel down before Him, and ask Him to give you peace and grace and enough strength to overcome your suffering. May God bless you and have a wonderful week in Christ.